So I want to move on to our next lab test to evaluate the body on why we're gaining weight. In doing so, we're going to start up here. We're going to talk about stress in our daily lives and how that comes down and affects our hormone system. So we'll be talking a lot about cortisol and how that affects the other hormones like testosterone, estrogen, and thyroid hormone, and how that contributes down to weight gain. So let's get started. And starting this conversation, I got to talk about the hypothalamus first. So the hypothalamus is in the brain, and he's kind of like the operator system, phone operator of the body and the mind. Basically, it takes all the inputs, what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're thinking at the time, what you're feeling, and it's basically evaluating our environment, and it's telling our body how to respond to our environment to survive. And this term is called allostasis. So it's just receiving information into the body, into this part of the brain called the hypothalamus, about the size of about a walnut, and then it tells the rest of the body what to do. So it communicates with our hormones, our body temperature, our thirst and appetite. It changes all of these so we can adapt to our environment and survive. So the hypothalamus, it really controls the body's temperature, our thirst, appetite, our weight control, our emotional state, sleep cycles, sex drive, blood pressure. So it has all these processes going that's on autopilot. That we don't have to think about it. So it's really just, like I said, it's like the switchboard as I have down here. It's kind of like the phone operator. It takes all this information in and it tells the body what we need to do to survive in that environment. In doing so, when we have a lot of stress, so if we see something on the TV, or if we have a fight with our spouse and we're just thinking about it over and over again, or if we hear or touch something that's stressful, or even if you just touch a hot stove and you kind of burn yourself, that's a stress to the body. It increases our cortisol levels. So cortisol is our main hormone that deals with chronic stress. And like I said before, we can have chronic stress internally and externally. So internally, we may have infections, nutritional stress, sleep disturbances, and externally, we may not like our job, we have a lot of stress at work, or we have a lot of family stress. And to our body, we're perceiving that as harmful, and we need to deal with that. So cortisol will increase in the body to help us deal with that. And this becomes problematic. I'll go ahead and go to this little schematic here. So we have over here the hypothalamus is part of the brain, kind of in between the eyes, and it communicates with the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary to stimulate these different parts of the body. And when we're talking about cortisol, we're talking about the adrenal cortex here, which secretes that. So cortisol, when it gets elevated, it does a number of things. The primary things it does is elevate blood sugar, or glucose in the body, because we need blood sugar for our mind to work and for us to deal with that chronic stress in our environment. And we're basically trying to get rid of that, but when we don't get rid of that stress, that's when this chronic overuse or chronic secretion of cortisol happens, and it really has a negative effect on our body. So one of the first things it does is cortisol suppresses our immune system, or immune function. So if you think back to high school or college during finals week, everyone gets sick. Well, why does everyone get sick? Well, they're trying to study for final exams and they're not getting any sleep, and usually their diet is poor, so they're really cranking out a lot of cortisol, and that suppresses your immune function. So you become vulnerable to colds and viruses, and you get sick a lot easier. It also affects the liver. So the liver is a primary organ that makes new blood sugar, more glucose for the body to use. So that term is called gluconeogenesis, so making new blood sugar. So when you make blood sugar, the other thing that happens is insulin goes up. So you need insulin to get inside the cell. Remember, it's that lock and key mechanism. So glucose is pretty much worthless without insulin. So you can lead to pre-diabetes if you have unchecked stress levels leading to high glucose and insulin levels. Then your protein, the protein in your muscles start breaking down, and also the protein in your gut lining will start to break down. So we make new blood sugar by using protein and fat from our fat cells and from our muscles and gut lining to make new blood sugar. And this is kind of a big slide. I want you to focus on these hormones here. So we'll focus on aldosterone, cortisol, testosterone, and basically estrogen, estradiol. And what happens when we're under chronic stress here is if we're making a lot of cortisol in the middle, we get what's called a pregnenolone steal. So we only have so much cholesterol to make all these hormones. And when we're under chronic stress, well, we need to make more cortisol to deal with that stress. So this cholesterol up here gets made into pregnenolone, and instead of making our sex hormones like our testosterone and estrogens, it gets taken over here, made into progesterone and down to cortisol to deal with the chronic stress. So a lot of men will become testosterone deficient, their testosterone decreases and their cortisol increases. Same thing with women, their estrogen levels may decrease and their cortisol levels increase. What that does is it increases fat stores around the waist and the hips because the body is redepositing fat around the body because cortisol is mobilizing those free fatty acids, we call them, from the fat cells. And this test is the test that we use to measure cortisol levels in the body. So this is a nice normal graph. Cortisol should start pretty high in the morning, 8 o'clock, and then it just slowly decreases throughout the day. So cortisol actually wakes us up in the morning, and then by the time we go to bed, our cortisol levels should be depleted. What happens when we have a lot of stress in our body, at first cortisol levels increase up here, and it stays elevated throughout the day. So then we may have a hard time going to sleep. We may feel fatigued in our bodies, but our minds, we can't shut our minds off. But over time, we go through adrenal burnout, and these levels will increase. But if we don't deal with that stress and decrease that stress, well, then the cortisol levels will eventually decrease, and then you just have that extreme fatigue, can't sleep, and you become depressed, and just a whole host of symptoms that we'll review. So kind of like what I said, we have those phases of adrenal burnout, and that's what I just described a couple minutes ago. But these are some of the symptoms that we have with adrenal dysfunction, cortisol dysfunction from chronic stress. The big ones: weight gain, the various fatigues either in the morning or the afternoon. You have difficulty sleeping, you don't have stamina, you just feel like you can't go, you get worn out very easily. You get anxious, irritable, allergies, because remember, cortisol affects the immune system. You get headaches and sugar cravings because you're constantly trying to make new blood sugar, new glucose, because your body thinks it's under chronic stress. You're trying to deal with that stress. So with more blood sugar being made and those sugar cravings, your chances of going to be a type 2 diabetic goes up significantly. Cortisol also blocks thyroid hormone in the body. So T4 is the most abundant thyroid hormone made by the thyroid gland, but when the body is ready to use it, it actually turns it into what's called T3. But when you're under chronic stress from elevated cortisol, T4 gets blocked from being made into T3 by cortisol. So you may actually have a hypothyroidism, but it's actually a cortisol excess. Like we talked about before, your muscles, the protein in the muscles get taken also from the small intestine, so you develop leaky gut and you get muscle wasting from chronic stress. Again, we have estrogen and testosterone decreases, our immune function decreases, and those free fatty acids from those fat cells increase, so your triglycerides in your bloodstream get elevated. You have sleep disturbances, anxiety, headaches, heart disease, memory and concentration impairment. And again, you get that redistribution of weight around the body, so you end up getting increased fat in the neck and the back and the stomach and the hips for women. So that's it on hormones and the testing for that, the adrenal stress index. Thanks for watching.